Every choice builds character. On the Virtuosity podcast, we explore how to make every day a rep toward excellence. I'm Corey, your host and co-founder of Virtuosity. My journey into character development began in sport, where I discovered that strengthening my character didn't just improve my performance, it transformed my entire life. Since then, I've been gripped with understanding how we can intentionally build character to fuel both personal and professional success. At Virtuosity, we believe character is like a muscle. It needs consistent training. That's why we've built a research-based system that acts as your character gym, making character development practical, scalable, and accessible, even within the largest organizations. On this podcast, we sit down with participants from our flagship Virtuosity program, where individuals commit to a full year of daily character development powered by Virtuosity. Our guests will share why character matters to them, how they're applying it in their personal and professional lives, and the insights they've gained along the way. We hope these conversations challenge, inspire, and equip you with new ways to integrate character into your own journey. Subscribe to stay up to date with our weekly episodes, and if something resonates, share it with your friends and colleagues. Ready to start your own Virtuosity journey? Download the Virtuosity Character app or visit virtuositycharacter.ca to learn more. Now, let's dive into today's episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 12th episode of the Virtuosity podcast. If you're new, I encourage you to check out our launch episode with Mary Crossan for a powerful introduction to this series. Today, we're thrilled to welcome Mélanie Bergeron as our guest. Mel is a seasoned public servant whose career has been fueled by curiosity and a passion for people. As a multi-passionate professional, her journey has spanned policy, Indigenous health research, employee engagement, mental health and well-being, organizational culture, and more recently, leadership and character development. A certified leader character practitioner, life coach, and psychology graduate from the University of Ottawa, Mel specializes in helping high performers grow into purposeful leaders who create lasting impact. At the heart of her work is a clear vision: to create a world where people are lit up by the work that they do, feel safe to show up as their whole selves, and a true sense of belonging while they're there. She believes this begins by striving for and embodying strength of character, and when this happens, both people and organizations can thrive together. Mel loves to spark conversations about character and turning them into practical strategies that leaders and organizations can apply every day to elevate performance and sustain excellence. Well, welcome, Mélanie, to the Virtuosity podcast. And the question that I always start asking our guests is, why does character matter to you?
Thanks so much for having me, Corey. Character to me at its core it's about being a good human. It's about being able to show up as the best version of ourselves, not just at our job, but for our partners, for our children, for our families, for our communities, right? So what I love about this framework is that it's such a complete framework. It gives us this complete picture of what strong character looks like. And it gives us that language so that now we can use it to define what that looks like, what being a good human looks like, what operating with strong character looks like. And then we can use it to sort of assess ourselves and figure out like where do we want to work on next, right? What's the next piece that I want to work on? And it's very specific, which is something I really appreciate. And I feel like, the more of us that can live by this framework, that can apply it in our lives, I don't know, it could sound a little corny, but I feel like, we can start to shift the world, right? We can just start making this world a better place to live in.
Yeah, it's sometimes when you think about these kind of big aspirations around character, it almost feels like, oh, can I really say that? But I'm right with you. I do really believe that if we can get this really democratized character and every individual can really commit to their character, it would be pretty amazing, especially from the organizational lens that you've been taking. Organizations can be such a driver of societal change. And so you've actually been in the character space for quite a while now across various organizations. And I think you've been taking mostly kind of a leadership development lens, but I think you've been looking at culture, hiring, that kind of thing. Maybe we could start with the leadership development perspective. So what are the ways or some of the examples you have of how you've been trying to embed character into leadership development, and perhaps you could share some examples of what you've done.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a great place to start too. So, I start with the belief that the character framework is at its core, at its basis for everyone, right? Not just leaders, not just people in positions of authority, right? I really believe in this disposition to lead. Now, with that said, when it comes to organizations, leaders, what they say, what they do, have a much bigger impact on the organization, right? Because of the responsibility that they're given with the position that they hold. There's a really great Canadian speaker who used to work with Simon Sinek, and he often says, for leaders, a whisper is a shout, right? And the higher up you go in an organization, leaders have to be very conscious of what they say and how they say it, because what they think of as a throwaway comment can potentially have a really strong impact on somebody that's listening in, right? Not that I want leaders at all levels to become self-conscious of every word that they say, but this is why character is so important. And leaders have to hold themselves to a higher standard, right? So yes, this is for everyone, but because of the impact that they have on organizations, they have the responsibility to hold themselves to a higher standard. They have to sort of go first. That's what leadership is. You're going first. And I'm a little nerdy sometimes, and so I really like the saying. I think it's from Spider-Man, but like with great power comes great responsibility, right? It can seem corny for some folks, but it brings back this idea of the responsibility, right? And again, folks who know me know how much I just adore Simon Sinek's work. And I often come back to his how he explains that when you're a leader, you're no longer responsible for yourself and your own job, right? You're now responsible for the people who are doing the job, right? So it's that sense of responsibility that I think needs to be at the forefront. And whether people realize it or not, when you're leading a team, even the supervisors and managers, sometimes I feel like folks in those first levels of management exclude themselves from the definition of leadership because, well, for all sorts of reasons, sometimes they just feel like they're not that important. But they really are, right? They also have an impact and a role to play. But when you're leading a team, that dynamic with your team changes. Even when you're taking on a leadership role temporarily, in government, we call it acting, right? You're acting in this role for a certain period of time. That dynamic changes. You're not their colleague anymore. You're now taking on that leadership role. And that's important, right? People will look up to you. Your words and your actions will just carry more weight. And especially when you're in an interim role, there's sometimes this place where people will just kind of like wait and see what you do with it, right? It's kind of a silent challenge to see, will you take up that space and own that role, even if you're in there for a short period of time. And I've seen folks do it, even though they're there for maybe a few weeks or a couple of months. And it's such a beautiful thing to observe in folks. And so back to the leadership development thing, what I've noticed in the last 5 years, there are more and more leadership development programs that are coming out of the woodwork now that are being created. And I think that's absolutely fantastic, right? We're changing the way that we're thinking and talking about leadership, right? We're done with the old command and control. And I think now with the work that you've been doing, that Mary and all the folks at Ivy and all of us practitioners now, we're changing that conversation. And so I love seeing programs that are teaching management skills around emotional intelligence and servant leadership, and how to have difficult conversations and how to think more strategically. Those are super important. And I think bringing character into that, it adds that other piece to the puzzle. Sometimes I think of it as like it's the glue that puts all the pieces together, right? It's I like to say that character is a lens through which we can take important topics that are relevant to leaders right now, especially in this uncertain, volatile, ever-changing context, and it rehumanizes it. Because sometimes I think we get lost in the strategy of it all, and character brings it back to this basic but so important question of like, who do I want to be in this context? Who do I need to be as I prepare to enter this meeting or this conversation, right? Or who do I need to be in order to see us through this, whatever the challenging time is, right? And I think that in this great big machinery of government, it's easy for us to feel small and insignificant and feel like there's no way we can have a positive impact, right? And I say this also for executives as much as employees, right? And maybe especially executives. What can I do in this role, even though sometimes I've heard folks take up executive roles because they think, well, maybe at this level, I'll be able to have a higher impact. And then they discover it's even more complex than it was before. And so it's easy to lose sight of that, of what we're doing and what we're trying to achieve. In a boardroom meeting, in a day filled with boardroom meetings and more meetings, and you sort of forget what you're doing and why you're doing it. And so this idea of bringing character at the forefront of that, making it the first thing that we think about, and asking ourselves these simple but really important questions, it helps us to sort of bring back what's important and sort of keep that top of mind. Because in the end, we can work in large organizations, and if we take the federal public service as one big giant organization, again, that can seem sort of too big or overwhelming. But in the end, I like to think of it as like we're people, right? We're all humans who make up this organization. We're imperfect and we're unique. And I truly believe that most of us show up to work with good intentions, especially in public service, right? Like we don't work for public service for the money. There's other ways to make a great salary, but we do it for service. And so again, the more that leaders can think about character and keep it in mind and put it into practice and lead not with their words, but by their actions, their behaviors. That's how they have a positive impact on the team. That's how they can impact and influence their colleagues, their partners, or stakeholders, and the organizations. And that's how we get a great organizational culture.
I love the questions you're asking around, like, who do I need to be? Who do I want to be? And it's funny, being in the character space for as long as I have been, I often don't ask that question enough. Like when we're in stressful times or you have tight deadlines or you have multiple choices, you often fall into the pattern of what should I do or what do I do next? And I have to remind myself, who do I want to be in this moment? And then the what kind of falls along. And so I think that's, we pose that question a lot, but it's such an important one to really continue to ask ourselves in the micro moments of who we are. And I also loved what you were talking about earlier on too, about the disposition to lead. And I think that's such an empowering piece in organizations if you can get everyone to feel that sense of accountability. And I find we talk about how context can influence character. And I find the leadership role a really interesting one in terms of the different dimensions that it activates or deactivates. So in some of the research, we found that the higher you go in leadership positions, it stresses your humility. It's harder to keep that humility strong. And so leaders have to really focus on activating that. Whereas people without formal positions of leadership, as you were saying, kind of the lower leadership levels, where they don't think of themselves as leaders, how do you activate that sense of accountability, transcendence, and drive, even when you don't have that formal leadership role? And so, yeah, I think just trying to activate all of those dimensions, no matter formal, informal role, you'll have that overall collective better judgment and decision-making in an organization.
Absolutely. And I find that for folks in either who are employees and not in leadership positions or those lower levels, oftentimes it's courage that we need to work on the most. And then you're absolutely right. The higher up you go, then it becomes humility, and how interesting that they're on opposite sides of the framework.
Yeah. Yeah, too good. And so with your own leadership, have you found there are particular examples or dimensions that have really helped you bring the best leadership forward in your work?
Um, yeah, I mean, for me, so full disclosure, I was a completely different person 5 or 6 years ago before I encountered this work. Um, and speaking of courage, I think that might be the dimension that I've needed to strengthen the most, um, for all kinds of reasons. But it's the like the tenacity and the resilience of it, of continuing to push forward and to continue um, to lean on like my principles, because this like finding this framework to me was like my big career aha moment. Like it changed everything, and um it felt like I finally found the thing that was important to me, sort of that my purpose. Um and so I've had to work on my own courage to push this forward, to um learn how to deliver presentations uh and like create and design workshops and have conversations with folks in positions that are way higher than mine, and still do my best to hold my own and not follow this instinct to stay small. Um, so courage has been a big one, um, and of course, like integrity and the humility of constantly learning. What I love most is learning from the participants in my workshop, because they ask really great questions. They live things, or are in parts of organizations, or come from different backgrounds that are different than mine. So because their perspective is so different, they bring really interesting questions, and that helps me continue to learn along the way. So I love that, because um, every workshop is completely different. I never know what I'm going to learn. And it makes me um, a better leader and a better facilitator. And I create even better content and workshops and whatever it is that I'm doing. So I just love how all of it sort of plays together. And I'm getting more courageous in how I present opportunities, right? And learning how to, I had a participant recently say that he uses the framework in a way to try to understand the people that he works with, like try to create his own sort of character profile for each person, and use that as a way to go, okay, if I see this person's strength is humanity and humility and collaboration, then I need to speak to them in this way so that we can understand each other. Whereas if someone else is more around sort of courage and accountability and drive, then I'll speak to them in a different way. And I thought that was just a brilliant way of thinking about things, right? The language that we use, but the way that we approach things. Um, so yeah, it's changed quite a bit, the way that I think about how we do this work, and how can I um continue to move this forward in a way that's going to be positive and well received by everyone around me.
That the your first part about finding the framework and it being an aha moment, that definitely resonates with me, and this kind of pull then on courage to enable you to do the work that you want to do. And I feel like when people start to find that strong sense of purpose, it puts less pressure on the courage, and it kind of, you just want to become more courageous. Doesn't mean that it's easier. You still have to,
Yeah.
face your fears, and you can't get away from that, but it gives you more of that fuel, like that transcendence piece, that fuel to want to do it. So I can certainly resonate with that. And the second point too about leader, or that participant you were talking about, trying to understand the different profiles of those that they work with, it reminded me of the behavioral forecasting that we've done in some of our sessions. And if you, the other side of that too is that if you can see what dimensions somebody else struggles with more, how can you try and activate that in others? And you were saying, you know, people without those formal roles of leadership may struggle more with courage. And so for those in leadership positions, I think it's easy to forget how much people struggle with courage. So how can you actually actively in conversations create opportunities that activate that courage in them? And then that just, we know that that will bring the best selves of those around you, which obviously supports the organization as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes because my position sits in the realm of HR, organizations will sort of look to us to like give us a tool, give us a thing, like how do we do character? And I've found that sometimes the simplest and most impactful way to start is by having conversations. And so how cool would it be to have leaders just do this fun sort of like assessment of like within the team, the different profiles of character for everyone on the team, and use that as a team building conversation and talk about like the strengths that we have on this team and where are the areas where folks need more support and how can we support each other. Like all of that can be a beautiful first step, and it's so simple. It's not this like complex, big, giant leadership development program for the whole team. It's just, let's have conversations about this.
Yeah.
And I think that would be super cool.
Yeah. And so we're really getting away, like we're moving from that leader kind of responsibility and looking at how this can start to manifest across people in conversations. And I know you've had a lot of interest in culture and you've done some work in the culture area. So what are the ways that you feel like character can really shape a culture? And if you have any examples you can share, that would be great too.
Yeah, I mean, I should probably start by saying that most of what I learned about culture, I was from the immense pleasure of getting to work with Jennifer Bitz in an organization. So I guess if folks haven't heard that episode, they should sort of pause this one and go back and listen to hers. But the saying that, you know, the culture of an organization is a reflection of the character of the individuals within it. To me, that again, that's the basis of how I look at culture in an organization. It starts with us, right? Each of us is individual. It has to start with us. And so often when you start the work of culture change, you know, you have to figure out where you're starting from. You have to sort of start at the beginning and figure out what your baseline is. And that can be really hard, right? It can mean airing out some dirty laundry and uncovering corners of the organization or places that aren't so healthy or at least harder or tougher than we would like them to be. You know, especially in, again, like I see the federal government as this organization that is as old as the Constitution of this country, right? Um, um, and I think about sort of before I stepped into this world of character, I had the immense honor of getting to work with Indigenous organizations and Indigenous researchers. And so sometimes I think about the work of culture with similar principles as the work we're doing around reconciliation, right? Because sometimes there is work of reconciliation that needs to happen. And so when you're figuring out what that baseline is, the hardest part is naming the thing, right? Naming the elephant in the room, because it's imperfect, and we don't like to be imperfect. And this is as much for an organization as for us and our personal character, right? The first time that you do a character assessment is really hard to see the things that are not so great about ourselves. And so it's hard for leaders, especially, right? Because who wants to take accountability for something that was done years before you even showed up, years before you were even in that position, right? Because I didn't cause the damage. It was so and so before me. It takes immense courage and accountability and humility and humanity on the part of the leaders to even dare to name the issues. But it's important for us to do that if then we're going to get clarity about what we need to work on and figure out where do we want to go from here and who do we want to be as an organization. And then the work can begin. Um, and so again, where character comes into that is leaders have to go first. They have to commit to do the hard work of developing and strengthening their character and showing up with courage and accountability and integrity. And that is hard. It takes commitment, right? But when they can set the example, especially over time, right? Because if a culture is not great, it didn't happen overnight. It happened over a long period of time. And so the culture change will take some time. And it takes enormous resilience and tenacity, right? All of those pieces around courage. But if over time they can show us through their actions, not just their words, that creating a safe space, that they want to change the culture, they want to create a healthy culture, that it really matters to them, that they want to create an environment where people feel safe to be themselves at work and safe to speak up, and they're encouraged to grow. That has a huge impact, and I think it makes the work of culture change easier. But it's like lifting a giant boulder. It takes enormous effort at first. And then once you gain momentum, once people start believing that leaders really are walking the talk and they really do have the best of intentions and they want to do better, then people will follow suit just naturally, right? Because they become inspired by their leaders. They feel safer at work. And then they want to start working on their own character, right? You'll still have the folks in the organization who aren't going to wait and who just see the benefit right away. They'll get it. But some folks need to wait and see before they decide to go along with it. And I think there's not one better way of doing it. I think it's just, again, Jen would talk about the system of it all and how it's not just one specific thing. But yeah, when you have those people in the system that are sort of committed to that continuous development, they're leading with character, they're showing up as much as possible as the best version of themselves, right? Again, we're humans, we're imperfect, we're going to have some bad days, but how we come back from those bad days also matters, right? That's where it gets really interesting to me, because again, what I love about the framework is that the language is universal, but how it manifests is completely different for each individual. So the more of us that can show up as our whole selves with all these different perspectives and lived experiences and different strengths, and if you add strong character to all of that, like that's when it becomes really cool to see, to experience, to be a part of. You get folks who can have courageous conversations. You have folks who allow themselves to be more creative, right? Come up with creative solutions. Creativity in government, what? But it's possible. Right? You get people starting to talk about how they love their job. And when a crisis hits, they can weather the storm, right? Because when you go to your job and you feel unsafe, you feel alone. And when you're working in a team where we're all operating on strong character and we all speak that language and we all know what kind of culture we want to create, then we're going through the hard thing together, right? And so that resilience is, again, like it's easier to activate because we don't feel alone, because we will support each other, because we will weather the storm and get through this together, and we might even come out stronger as a team.
Yeah, it's an amazing aspiration to see how character could really infiltrate a culture and how that could transform. And there's no doubt that it starting from the leadership is going to be really, really important. That was similar to some of the the insights Jen was sharing as well. And I think I had asked her this, but I want to ask you the same question. For a lot of the listeners, most of them won't be in leadership positions. And so you've had the experience of trying to pitch and push character, not necessarily from the top of the organization. So for a lot of people listening, they may want to be bringing character more explicitly into their organizations, but they don't necessarily have that choice. Do you have any tips drawing on your experiences of what it takes to do that? And I'm sure it takes a lot of character as well, as you're talking about the resilience and tenacity. So yeah, what are some tips and insights you have to share there?
Oh, it's such a great question. Um, well, again, it starts with us. So if there's any job that requires us to walk our talk, it's this one. Especially those of us who are lucky enough to do the work of implementing character or applying character in an organization as our full-time job and not just something on the side of our desk or as part of something else that we're doing. But even when it's a small piece, we have to walk our talk, which means we have to be constantly working on our own character. We have to figure out what is it that we need to activate in ourselves. And again, like the courage piece, like to keep pushing and keep trying to do things differently. Because again, like this job, like sometimes I marvel at the fact that I get to do this full time. My job didn't exist before. And to me, that's exciting, right? For some folks, it's terrifying. But for me, I love being able to come to this role, and it's never been done before. And so I get to be creative and to see how I can be the most useful. But if you're in a smaller organization and you're the only person doing this job, it can be very lonely and very difficult. So the other piece that's important is that sense of community. And I'm so glad that we now have a strong community of practice. And I do what I can to connect with others in other organizations who are doing this work or who are just starting off, to help each other out, again, because it's hard doing this work. Sometimes you're not always going to get a yes on your first try to position something, to propose an idea. And so it takes multiple efforts. So that sense of community is really important, to be able to lean on each other and bounce ideas off of others who maybe done it before or tried something and maybe that didn't work, but maybe we can do it differently. That has been hugely helpful for me, not just to share my own experiences, because I'm fortunate enough to have started this work sooner than others who are now doing it, but at the same time, learning from what they're doing and how they're doing things differently and bringing back those ideas. So the exchange is really important. And then within the organization, it's to figure out who your champions are. And yes, it's hugely helpful if my own leaders are fully supportive and walk the talk and truly believe in it and are going to champion the ideas forward. But also, who are the champions in the organization who will do the work for you, right? Because again, I'm just the HR person, and it becomes way more impactful if the conversations are happening without HR being there, right? When you start to use the language, if you can bring on board your communications folks, people working in what we call internal communications, right? The emails that go to all staff. If you can start to embed the language of character there, people become accustomed to seeing the words, to using the language, to understanding what we mean by it. And if it can become part of that vernacular, the day-to-day conversation, those champions will be another really important lever within the organization.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so speaking of levers, the other big lever that you've been part of, which is really interesting, is hiring on character, selecting on character. And there's always so many questions around that because selection, hiring, recruiting, it's already hard to begin with, let alone bringing character into it. Can you share some of the experiences behind selecting on character and perhaps some of the challenges and ways you've been able to head on those challenges?
Yeah. So again, just so fortunate to be able to not just like do the work, but to do it in different capacities. So it's so fascinating. So, okay. So, um, one thing I have noticed is the difference between, a pass fail on character interview versus a right fit character interview. Um, the pass fail interview has way more impact on the organization because it sends a message to the organization that we mean business, and it sends the message to candidates that we mean business. It's very difficult. Like that takes courage on the part of the organization to do that, to say that that's what we're going to do and to stand by it. But it is trickier than we think it might be. But when you hire leaders of strong, well-balanced character, you're setting yourself up to create this great culture with leaders who lead with strong judgment, right? And so that has a really great impact, especially over time. So just to explain sort of how I've been a part of hiring with character. So um, the way that we did it in this one organization I was in, we ran this hiring process in the normal way traditionally with all of the other things that are assessed along the way, and the character interview was the last piece. So character was assessed in an interview, and it replaced the traditional competency-based interview. So competencies were assessed in a different way. So the reason that it is trickier than we think is because, again, we are humans assessing humans. We are imperfect assessing imperfect people. And so the people who are on those hiring boards, again, must have a higher standard, must have an active character development practice. We have to be working on our own character because we need to check our biases. I know we have to do it in regular interviews, but in the character interview, it's even more important, right? Because how we perceive what someone says is everything, right? And when you tell someone that they failed a character interview, it does not land the same way that it would in a competency-based interview, right? It feels like a personal attack. So even the way that we deliver that result needs to be so careful and mindful. And so back to the hiring board. So you need to really constantly check your biases. So you have to have a diverse board. And you have to be able to have candid conversations with your colleagues about what you saw in the interview. And I saw this and I saw that. And what do you think? And am I being judgmental in this way, or is this correct? And those candid conversations are really important. And the character interview is so much more vulnerable, especially for candidates, right? So it's really important to create a psychologically safe space at the outset, at the beginning of the interview, and throughout the conversation, right? The interview can get really vulnerable. We're asking different types of questions. We're trying to get to know who you are. It can get personal and even emotional at times. And so it's important, again, for the board members to hold space, to learn and know how to hold space, and to sort of activate their humanity, to be empathetic and know how to navigate that and still bring it back to, we're still in an interview, but it blurs the line, I think, between the personal and the professional, and not everyone is comfortable with that. And candidates aren't used to being asked about themselves. Um, Not personal questions, but things like, um, when was the last time you had to apologize to someone, can show us really interesting pieces of character, but not everyone is willing or able to answer that authentically, right? And so, and board members, by the way, so the interview, we don't, we encourage them, board members, to not use pre-canned or predetermined questions. So that too is uncomfortable as much for the candidate as for the board members, because again, folks rely on HR to like, just give me all the things and the grid and let me just check the boxes. And when you're doing a character interview, you can't check boxes. You have to be able to know how to ask great questions that will start to draw out character from the individual, and how to ask great follow-up questions and follow your curiosity rather than following a list of questions. So sometimes in my reflection around hiring, I feel like hiring on character requires two skill sets. One is knowing how to ask great questions that will sort of draw out character. And the other thing is to really be good at spotting character in the answers, right? Because we're not looking for candidates to use the language of character in their answers. It's our job as the folks assessing to listen and to say, oh, what you're saying, that's courage, that's accountability, that's integrity, right? And so that takes a lot of practice. And some folks are good at one thing, but not the other thing. And I think that's okay as long as we have a board that has that sort of variety and different strengths. Because it's okay if you have a board of 3 or 4 people and one of them is really great at asking great questions and the others are really great at listening for the elements of character in the answers. And then that deliberation is just so important. And so so sort of challenges and opportunities, but opportunities there, hiring with character can be really interesting because it generates some really important discussions between hiring managers. Unfortunately, sometimes those happen after the hiring process, especially if it resulted in less people passing than we hoped there would be. But it brings back these important questions that I don't think hiring managers are used to thinking about around, what are we really looking for? What kinds of leaders do we want to hire? What kind of culture do we want to build or to promote? What kinds of people have we hired in the past? And is that working? Do we want to do it differently? Right? Because although in a character interview, we are looking for sort of that global strength in all of the dimensions, there's also a thought process to there's a tension between what we need, and it has some connotations around competencies, but it also has connotations around character strengths. And there's a balance to strike there. And I don't know what the solution is. And because I don't think you can have like a pure character interview and assessment. Because again, character is a piece of who this whole person is. I don't think we at least from what I've seen, it's not perfect. It takes a lot of work. But I think we're on the right track. As long as we continue to hold ourselves accountable to doing the work ourselves, if we are to have the honor of assessing others' character. And it's important to remember that the quality of the interview is not only a reflection of the candidate, but it is also a reflection of the character of the board members as well. Because whether you know it or not, the really great candidates will be assessing you throughout the interview, whether you know, right? So that's kind of it's like the secret sauce to it. If you can remember that, you already are way more ahead, right? Because it's about who you are as the question asker. It's not about the questions that you ask. It's about how you show up for the candidate in the interview, in the conversation. Um, and that's a piece that I think is really cool about this that is different than what we've done in the past.
Hmm. Yeah, I just want to highlight like how important I think it is that you're saying that the interviewers are developing their character actively. That you said they all have to have a development plan. And for all the reasons that you spoke about, being able to ask the questions, creating psychological safety, and also being able to identify those virtues and potentially vices in the interviewees. And, we take a really deliberate attempt in the Virtuosity program to notice these virtues and vices in our day-to-day micro moments. And, doing this for many, many years, you still start to see virtues and vices show up differently across people. And so it is such a nuance, especially with someone that you're meeting for the first time. And so while it's easy to observe character and you can do it right away, there is a lot of nuance that you can pick up. And the more you practice discovering that each day, it can be really powerful. And for the listeners too that might be new to the character interviewing piece, I think it is really interesting when you were talking about how, if you get a no from a character interview, it can feel very threatening. It can feel like an attack on who you are. And I'm really grateful that we're having this conversation because it is a way to start changing the conversation about this, because it is your character and competence that do impact how you serve or contribute to an organization. And so we've got to start bringing more accountability to that character piece. And I think the non-threatening part about it is that we can develop our character. So it's not like we're saying no to who you are. It's just no to who you are right now because you have those shortages, just like you'd say no to people with shortages of competencies. And so the fact that there are so many tools and development plans out there, it should give people the motivation to be able to know that they can shore up those shortages, and character development is available to anyone.
Yeah, and you're making me think too about sort of what happens when we have internal candidates
Mhm.
um, that we are so hoping will pass, right? Because we have a succession plan and we want to put them over here or that, and we want to do all these things. And when it comes back and they haven't passed their character interview, it's very difficult for everybody involved. And it brings back this question of like, because the hiring and the development of character in an organization is kind of a chicken and egg. Like, where do you start? And so when you are trying to hire for character internally and the folks you were hoping to get through didn't get through, it brings these conversations about, have we done enough to grow these future leaders? Have we done enough, or have we focused too much on their competencies and making sure they're prepared from a competency perspective for their role, and we've forgotten to help them strengthen their character, to support them with coaches or mentors or peer-to-peer programs or whatever it is, because that's what's going to make the difference. As an organization, we have to think about both. So that's an interesting, from outside the organization, there's not much we can do, right? We can share materials to help candidates prepare, but internally it becomes, I don't know which one comes first, development or hiring. But definitely if you're going to hire with character, it becomes a huge incentive for folks to start working on developing their character if they know that they want to go there one day and they want to take that position.
Yeah.
It's an incentive to get the work going.
Yeah, for sure. And so on the development piece, again, you've been in the character space for so long, you've been developing your character for a very long time, but you've recently joined the Virtuosity program in January, and curious to hear more about how that development experience has been for you since starting the Virtuosity program. Perhaps maybe what's different, or the different learnings and insights you might have gained through this program compared to before.
So I have to say, I'm not great with the habit building piece. um, uh, so a few years ago, I was diagnosed with ADHD, which opened my eyes to a whole new understanding of who I am and how I am the way that I am. And I understand that the struggle with habit stems from a piece of that, but it just means that I have to put more effort and to find different ways of incentivizing myself. Sort of, to me, it's the like, why is this important to me? As opposed to just doing it because I have to, or it's a habit or whatnot. So I just have to reframe it in my mind. And so earlier on in the program, I wasn't great at sort of showing up day to day, and I missed a bunch of different days in the assessments, and I would forget, and I'd get to the end of my week and I could do my weekly assessment, but I have no idea how I did on the day to day. So it was kind of wonky at first, and it's taken a few months to sort of get there. So the consistency I'm doing a lot better at. But I do also find that even if I'm not in the app every day, I still think about character every day. I still will keep either that dimension or that element in mind as I go about doing the things that I do on the day to day. I do appreciate the accountability of the monthly sessions as well, where if I've been wonky in my habits, it forces me to like catch up because we're about to have this conversation. So you better have your stuff together, Mel. Um, and I've been really appreciating the lessons once we get sort of further on in the month. Because that's where like I get those nuances and sort of different ways of understanding certain elements. I try to pick an element that I'm less familiar with. So it's not so much based on whether it's a strength or a weakness for me, but sometimes it's like, oh, this dimension, like I'm familiar with all these other ones, but I haven't spent enough time thinking about this. So like for example, this month we're on justice, and I picked socially responsible, and I go like, oh, like I think I know what that means. But I like the work of like thinking deeper and really again putting it to the forefront of my thought of like, what does that really mean? Do I understand it correctly? Is my perspective broad enough? Do I really apply it? How does that show up? So that I find has been really interesting because the program kind of forces me to narrow my vision of focus on something that I may not have had time to think about in the past, even though I have been thinking about character for years, but going sort of element by element and going deeper down into it has been really interesting.
Yeah, the deep dive in the element always surprises me too. And just having this hyper focus, it's like you said, even if you're not in the app every day, it kind of just bleeds into everything else that you're doing or you're thinking about. And so I can definitely relate to that. And the collective focus, I feel like it's very motivating and energizing for me as well. Not only, wanting to show up to the session with something to contribute, but just knowing that other people, there's a group with you that's focusing on the same thing. They're trying to do it day in and day out. That collective movement can be really powerful.
Mm-hmm.
So as we are winding down, the final question I like asking all of our guests is around that character quotient. And so if the listeners aren't familiar with the character quotient, it's a set of 10 questions that Mary and I came up with that really have you reflecting on how well you're kind of bringing character into, as a character champion. And so the first four questions are around your character awareness, the second four around your character development, and the last two are around your character application, whether it's in your organization or some other part of your life. Did you have a chance to do that? And if you did, would you be able to share maybe some areas that you're really happy with and the areas that you'd like to focus on more?
Yeah, so I did do it just before we got together and for this conversation. I have done it in the past. I don't remember exactly what the result was, but I remember it being a lot lower than it was this time around. So I was surprised at how high it was. And that makes me wonder like, ooh, like, did I judge myself too high and I need to rethink? But I got a 90. I think part of it is because I have the privilege of doing this work all day, every day. Like it's my job to think about this, to work on my own character, to stay informed, and to move this forward in my organization. So I think that plays results. So definitely like around observing and identifying. Again, I teach this to people. So, and I've assessed character, so I better be good at it, right? Um, and where I was lowest makes complete sense, right? It's around myself and my habits and what I'm constantly working on. And the one around being aware of how your character influences your well-being and performance. So as part of our program, we talk about self-awareness. So once we've done an introduction, the next piece is around self-awareness. And so we lean on the work of Dr. Tasha Eurich around internal and external self-awareness. So that was a piece for me that I've had to work on quite a bit in this work as well is I tend to be a little clueless in terms of how I show up. I've gotten pretty good at showing up authentically as much as possible, but I sometimes have no idea of the impact that I can have on others. So I've had to do quite a bit of work on um, knowing what that is or becoming aware of it. And so I gave myself a 7 on that because it's to me a continuous work in progress. Um, and so the rest around like championing the work, it's my job to do that. And because again, you're talking about the transcendence piece. You're right that I lean on that. I believe in this work, and so it's easier for me to give myself a 10 on those things because it's not just my job. Like I do this because I truly believe in it. So it's easier for me to continue to do this work.
Yeah. Yeah, no doubt. I really do believe that 90 is a solid score, just knowing all the things that you are doing, living and breathing it. And so, yeah, it is amazing to see all the things that you do bring to the character area. And so as we are winding down, I don't have any more questions for you, but I want to make sure that you feel like you had the opportunity to share whatever is on your mind. Is there anything else you'd like to add to the conversation before we close up?
Um, Maybe just the piece around something for folks who maybe are tiptoeing into this or are thinking about starting this work in their organizations, or maybe they've just gotten their certification and they're asking themselves, like, where do I start and how do I do this? I think sometimes we make this work way more complicated than it needs to be. Um, Once you get past sort of the awareness phase, the introduction stuff, right? The call it a workshop or a training or whatever it is you build. Um, it really is, if you treat it as a lens through which to have conversations, then it becomes really simple. And it doesn't need to be a heavy lift. You don't need a ton of resources. All you have to do is create tools or work with leaders and managers and supervisors to be brave enough to have character conversations and sit in the discomfort of, I have no idea what I'm doing, but let's try this anyway. Just that will be huge. Start simple and keep it simple. And to me, I think that will have way more impact and it will generate more interesting conversations around strategy for the organization and how we want to do this, right? It's kind of a build it as you go sort of situation. You don't need to build your strategy first. It's kind of it's like a startup. You have to treat it like a startup within your organization.
Yeah.
Build it, ship it. It's gonna be wonky. It's gonna be imperfect, but do it anyway and adjust as you go. It's gonna be great.
Yeah, I think that's such an important piece, and the all of the stuff that we know around habit literature, especially coming out of James Clear's work. If there's a lot of friction, if this is going to be difficult, if there are barriers, you're not going to do it. And so, just creating that really simple first step around even using the language of character, or you said the lens of character in your conversations, it's such a powerful first piece, and it will slowly build over time without you needing to necessarily over-engineer it. So just getting started, I think, is such an important piece. Well, thank you so much, Mel, for taking the time to join us on the Virtuosity podcast. You have such a wealth of experience and knowledge, and I know the listeners are going to love to learn from all of your insights. So thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure.
You have just finished another episode from the Virtuosity podcast. If you have any questions and want to connect, please reach out to me at corey@virtuositycharacter.ca. I'm also on LinkedIn, so let's connect. As always, thank you so much for listening. Bye for now.